And most people don't know this, but I know I'm preaching to the crowd here. So that impact of groundwater levels has had an impact on this town. And Niobrara has moved twice. So it was originally settled much closer to the river. But the flood of 1881 convinced the town to move up to something higher. But what the town moved up onto was this area right here where your golf course is now, which is really a terrace on the Missouri River. So it's not really that technically up out of the floodplain. It's not up on the valley wall, but it's up on a sort of a previous floodplain, an old unused floodplain of the Missouri River that we call a terrace deposit. So it did sit up from where it was at fairly significantly, but not enough, because once sedimentation started coming in the 60s and 70s, and it started to raise that water table, you started seeing that impact in the town of Niobrara. And so in the mid to late 70s, Niobrara moved again from that terrace up to where it is today. And that same sort of issue caused Niobrara State Park to move from the island it was on in the river up to where it's at on the hill as well. So just a couple of historical pictures. This is a 1938 photo of the Niobrara area. So here you see the town of Niobrara sitting on that Missouri River terrace. And here you see the Niobrara River. Looks a lot different back then than it does today. And then here is an interesting photo from the mid-1970s capturing the new town streets being built up on the hill, and the old town's still down there by the Missouri River. So there's a lot of potential solutions that are being talked about. One of them, though, that I think everybody should consider is that sediment management along basically many of the watersheds that contribute to this area could help slow down the rate of sediment accumulation. It's not going to stop it, but you could buy a lot more time. So one of the Corps of Engineer consultant reports felt like there was a lot of sediment coming from just the lower 20 miles of the Niobrara River itself. And so regional sediment management just in that stretch could cut down on a lot of the sediment coming in. There's a couple of things that have been talked about in terms of physically moving the sediment. One of those is to dredge it. So get dredges out there, dredge it, but of course if you do that, you have to figure out where you're going to put it, right? And that's sort of what the catch is what would be economically feasible to move that sediment somewhere. So the first and most traditional thought is build the slurry pipeline and dump it on the other side of Gavin's Point Dam where the river could really use that sediment again. And so maybe that's a possibility, but right now there's disagreement in terms of how economical that would be. The Corps has their own idea in terms of flushing the sediment. They're talking about basically drawing down Lewis and Clark Lake, making a modification to the outlet at Gavin's Point Dam, so it's not just the spillway gates, but something lower that the water could flow through, and then put a slug of water coming from Fort Randall Dam down and let it push the sediment through the dam structure and back into the river. So that's an idea, but again, that's something that has its problems and hasn't been proven to be something that could be successfully done. And then they're sort of getting back to managing what goes on in your watersheds above here. The Lewis and Clark Watershed Project, which was implemented by the Randall RC&D, is, I think, a good example of doing something like that. They've implemented best management practices, put in grass strip buffers, looked at their land use patterns, looked at the way they graze and things like that, the way they till their land to minimize the amount of sheet erosion that takes place, and basically to minimize the amount of sediment that's coming off of the land into the smaller drainages, because from those smaller drainages where it's going to then is the Niobrara River, the Missouri River, Ponca Creek, and so on. So if we manage what we're doing in the watersheds on the landscape, that can really cut down on the amount of sediment that's coming in and really buy a lot more time to help solve this problem. So I just wanted to show you a couple of slides from the current study we have going on. we're basically looking at the dynamics of the sediment deposition in this area. And so 3 of the things that we're doing is we're out there sampling all of the tributaries to try to get a better handle on what is the sediment load coming in from all of those tributaries. That'll help us, and we're also doing what we call sediment fingerprinting, where we actually go out in the delta itself, and on various sites at the delta, we sample the sediment, analyze it, and then that helps us figure out where the sediment might be coming from. Is it coming from the Niobrara River in general? Is it coming from all the way from the sand hills? Is there significant sediment that might be making it from Ponca Creek? So that's kind of what that study is all about, is trying to get a better handle on really just where that sediment comes from. We're also looking at the sediment budget between Redbird Bridge and the Highway 12 bridge on the Niobrara River. Because like I alluded to earlier, we know there's a heck of a lot of sediment deposition that takes place in the last couple miles of the Niobrara River. And so we're trying to get a better handle on what really gets lost between, what's further upstream, like at Redbird, and by the time it makes it all the way, that water makes it all the way down to the mouth of the Niobrara, is it picking up even more sediment and delivering it to the Missouri? Or has it decreased because we have so much of it falling out in the last 2 miles of the Niobrara River? And again, remember I talked about how the Niobrara River exhibits these perfect characteristics of a river system that is gaining a lot of sediment in its last couple of miles because of the way that channel will suddenly shift from one channel to the other every once in a while. So in the end, we think that knowing this type of information, one of the things that it will do is help us provide insight into what would be the best area to target if something came about where we could start removing sediment from the delta. You got to figure out where is the best place to start removing that sediment, and that's one of the things we're trying to figure out with this study that we're currently working on. So again, Ponca Creek is one of those things we're targeting, and Ponca Creek is pretty interesting if you look at Ponca Creek coming down here. Just how much sediment's built up around here. A lot of that's former floodplain of the Missouri, but not all of it. Ponca Creek has a pretty good delta itself that it's built. So we're trying to, instead of just qualitatively being able to say, yeah, there's a lot of sediment there, we're trying to quantify it and be able to say just how much is it really contributing. So again, I just wanted to thank Sandy and the MSAC organization. They're the ones who have realized the need for this kind of information, and they're the ones that have funded us and my colleagues to go out and do this type of research. So with that, I'll be glad to take any questions or comments.